This is Barrie, a city constantly evolving. At any time, a whole host of pressures challenge the intricate tapestry of city government. In this series, we will explore the priorities deemed essential for progress, even if they don't always inspire unanimous applause. Join me each week for a candid conversation with a member of our city government as we uncover the stories behind the scenes of Barrie, a city on the move. Welcome to Barrie, City on the Move. I'm Arif Khan, and it's my pleasure to join you wherever you're receiving this content, at home, on cable, or online and on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. In this series, it's our goal to provide a look inside what it takes to operate in municipalities such as the City of Barrie, whether it's from the perspective of council and governance and leadership, to operations, or outside partner, third-party agency relationships that are strategic in ensuring we are able to deliver that quality of life and service to our residents. Today, I have the great opportunity to speak with Chief Fire Prevention Officer Tim Donis, who's with Barrie Fire and Emergency Services. And Tim, thanks for taking time to join me and to provide an opportunity. There's been lots going on in the city, but also in the province with the legislation, so I'm glad you're here to join us today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and hopefully share some ideas on some of the recent changes. Absolutely.
Well, let's get into that. First, before we get started right down the path of prevention and education, give us a bit of a scope of what falls under the purview of Barrie Fire and Emergency Services. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So when people think of the fire services, they immediately think of firefighters in their bunker gear going to fires and putting the fire out, which is a big part of what we do. Our operations also speak to medical emergencies, so they might go to different properties for the various medical emergencies. They might also deal with water issues if somebody's having a hard time on the water, to go and make sure that those people can be safe. And as well, we have our communication services where when you call 911, it's the first person you speak to.
Excellent. And so with that in mind, I mean, there's the adage that says the best fire is the one that never happened, right? And so you're dealing with, but fire can happen in any number of environments. As you said, they can be marine fires, there have been some where you got to go out there and rescue. We now have changes in technology and changes in the way that homes are built. So that can include, and we'll talk a little bit about it today, EV vehicles and the charging of them, but also if you're attending a collision on the highway or on a roadway, again, what type of fuel or what type of motor or is it combustible, not combustible type of vehicle that you're dealing with. So lots of things that you get into. You specifically, though, are the Chief Fire Prevention Officer. What does that mean to me?
Okay, so what that means is that buildings are in existence, they're always evolving, and we have to keep on top of that. Somebody's got to be looking at the things that make sure that you're safe when you enter into a building. So what our unit does is we actually go into new construction to make sure that the new requirements for what should be in brand new buildings, as well as buildings that are undergoing anything with a permit, are taken care of. We also go in on a routine basis and we check to make sure that the Ontario Fire Code requirements are taken care of. These are the requirements specific to mostly maintaining buildings, to make sure that their health is good from now until hopefully the end of the building's useful life. We also reach out to the public. We do a lot of public education initiatives, and we try to educate, because the first idea that we go with is, if we can stop a fire before it happens, that's the best time to stop the fire, the least damage. The other thing that we do is after a fire's occurred, we go in and we look post-fire, is what we call it. So we do the investigations piece of it, where we figure out what happened, if there's any lessons learned, and what could have prevented the fire from spreading the way that it did.
All right. And are you involved in that investigation? Are you involved in looking for things like, if we've had a few recently? There was a chiropractor's office on Esser Road, and I'm not going to be the judge and jury here, but there may be questions about whether or not it was an arson or purposely set fire or accidentally set fire versus mechanical failure, for example. Is that part of your investigation?
Absolutely. So what we look for is what came in contact with what to create the fire, and then we try to explain how the fire spread.
Okay, all right. Now there is an office of the fire marshal, and that is separate and apart from your office. How does that relationship work?
Yeah, so there are certain criteria, for instance, that the office of the fire marshal will come to. We will investigate a wider scope of fires because we are specific for the City of Barrie. And sometimes it does mean partnering with the Office of the Fire Marshal to make sure that that the Office of the Fire Marshal investigators have what they need to make sure that they're successful in developing their hypothesis as to how the fire started.
Okay. In policing, I'm aware when you have an accident scene, let's say it's a motor vehicle collision, sometimes you'll have a reconstruction department, like they try and reconstruct the accident.
Yeah.
I'm hearing it a little bit different. You're trying to see what the remnants or what the remains of the building are telling you as the story, not so much reconstruction?
We get into both, actually. So part of what we do when we investigate a fire is we call it delayering. And what we want to do is we find out, based on fire patterns, where we think the fire started. That's the first piece of that. After that, we're going to remove all of the contents from that area to see what kinds of things could have possibly started a fire here, and we're going to try to rule them out one at a time. At the very end of that, we then put the scene back together the way we think it was, similar to what you referred to. And the goal there is to see if there's any inconsistencies with the fire patterns based on the way that we think things spread.
Gotcha. So, I mean, I could go down a rabbit hole. This sounds very exciting, to be quite honest with you. And then, of course, you throw in some television like a Chicago fire, et cetera. There's the goal towards realism, but at the same time, there's entertainment value in there. Just for those who may have familiarity with some of these types of shows, what are some of the big differences between our perception of what we think fire prevention or firefighting, even in that case, looks like versus what we might be familiar with more from entertainment value? Yeah.
So the biggest thing that I see when I look at this is Chicago fire as an example. It looks really cool because you can see the flames in the distance and all that. When we talk about fires, the first thing that we think about is smoke from an actual response standpoint. How much smoke is there in this compartment? How far can you see? Sometimes the smoke is so heavy that you can't see your hand in front of your face. And so the way that moves is that it goes, the smoke goes up. I think of it like an upside down bathtub a little bit. So if you can think of a bathtub where you have water dripping down, right? It's going to fill that basin up, and the level of water is going to increase the more water gets let out of the faucet. In the fire investigations world and in the fire suppression world, what we look for is essentially that same principle, but upside down. All the smoke's going to pour upwards, and then it's going to fill the top and work its way down, which means that when you go into these situations, what we really want to do is stay as low as possible so that we can get low under the smoke. That's where you're going to see the best. That's where you're going to have the best quality of air. But that's a big misconception that I do find for sure is when you look at the TV, you see the big flames. You don't necessarily see the big flames in a real fire.
Okay, and that's important, and I think if we're going to allow for an opportunity for education to the public here, I think that's critical. And people might say, well, you know, how likely is it that my house is going to catch fire? How likely is it that there's going to be a problem? We have seen quite recently, and maybe even seasonally, we've seen a fair number of active fire or fire-related situations. Are there any trends that you're seeing right now that are maybe cause for concern or things that a little bit of awareness would help with?
Yeah, so we have seen a lot of garage fires recently, and when I talk about garage fires, we do the whole investigations piece of it, and sometimes what we've been finding more so recently than not is that that's actually being caused by smokers' materials being discarded. So what we aim to do is to raise awareness on the fact that if you throw a cigarette on the floor or into a bunch of paper, it can actually smolder and then eventually cause a fire to happen. And when we do go into these places, a lot of the time where we find this is the case, we'll see thousands of cigarette butts. It's a standardized practice. So what we can do is we can change the way that we behave with regards to where we're putting these cigarette butts. And that's the best way to really eliminate it.
So the thing that's coming to my mind right now is my garage is where I store most of my flammable items, like
Yes.
my gas can or my solvents or whatever chemicals may be. Correct me if I'm wrong, but and you mentioned the papers, for example, and or tossing the cigarette and maybe stomping it out, maybe not, but one ember. But it's not just, it's also fumes, right? Fumes are combustible, are they not?
Fumes are combustible. When we look at, we have to have a couple things. We have ignition risk and then we have fire growth risk. And when we talk about these flammable and combustible liquids, if there's an initial fire, even though it's small, eventually it can grow. And these lighter materials that can cause ignition, they can definitely contribute to fire growth as well. So although you might have the initial smoldering event in the case of a cigarette ignition, eventually we can get to the point where that smoldering ignition goes to open flaming and then it comes in contact with all of the things you have in your garage, including vehicles sometimes, which can cause a whole other set of concerns, right? Once they get involved with the fire.
So, January 1st, the province announced some changes to legislation.
Yes.
Some of them are going to be a tightening and some of them are going to be a modification. I want to be careful not to say a loosening of regulation. I'll let you decide on how you want to explain that. Before we go to break, and we're going to talk over the next few segments of some of these things that are related to the changes in legislation or other forms of prevention and education, but what are some of the key things that were announced on January 1st, key changes?
So one of the biggest key changes is going to be the increased requirement for carbon monoxide alarms in houses, and all buildings for that matter. Another key change is going to be how we have 2-unit residential occupancies and what that means for the interaction between occupants.
Okay, so before we go to break, just give us an idea again. You said the fire isn't always flames that we're seeing, and the first thing that comes to my mind is one, smoke, but two, it's also the silent killer that carbon monoxide is referred to as. And is that why that's been, the legislation's been changed? Are we seeing an increase in carbon monoxide related death?
Yeah, so there's certainly, it's always been a concern. This is a change that kind of came in about 10 years ago into the Fire Protection and Prevention Act for us to look at, and we're learning lessons as we go. So what we're learning is, if we have increased detection, because we are talking about an odorless, tasteless, invisible gas, without something to tell us that there's a fire there, or sorry, carbon monoxide there, we really won't have any way to know. So by increasing this detection, what we're really doing is raising awareness when this gas is present.
So, Chief Donis, when we come back from the break, your role, your purview is around prevention in particular, so that includes education. That also includes us understanding why some of the rules exist, and some of those rules that I'm going to say this on behalf of some of our audience members, perhaps. When we hear things like permits being required and inspections, to me, some of us, our blood pressure raises, and we think, oh, that's just another administrative surcharge and tax, and it's an inconvenience, and it's slowing down my progress towards the outcome that I'm looking forward to enjoying. So I'm going to give you a moment to think about that, and when we come back from the break, let's get into maybe you providing some insight why some of these things exist.
Sure.
Sound good?
Absolutely.
All right, so stay with us. More from Chief Fire Prevention Officer Tim Donis. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and I'm having a fantastic conversation, I hope you think so, with Tim Donis, who's the Chief Fire Prevention Officer with Barrie Fire and Emergency Services. And before we went to break, we teed up kind of two subtopics, and one was the new legislation that came in January 1st, 2026, and that predominantly, the big standout was the requirement for increased presence of carbon monoxide detectors. Take us through a little bit about what some of the changes are, because I think carbon monoxide detector requirement's been around for a while, but there's been some modifications to that.
Yes, absolutely. And in order to really get into this, I want to say something just briefly about what creates carbon monoxide. So what we're talking about in homes that might create carbon monoxide, we're talking about furnaces, we're talking about boilers, we're talking about fireplaces of any kind, whether they're fuel, like a natural gas or wood burning, and really even gas stoves, anything like that. So the reason I want to talk about the risk there is that this is where it's being generated, and anything that really could burn and create that carbon monoxide component. The reason why that's relevant is because, let's talk about houses for a second. There's a certain set of rules in houses which, in my opinion, have actually been simplified in January, but it's actually an increase in detection.
Okay.
So what it means is, before we used to ask for carbon monoxide alarms outside of sleeping rooms, and although that's still the case, we also need carbon monoxide alarms on every level of your home. That's for detached homes, semi-detached homes, and townhouses. The reason that's important is that we want to make sure that if there's something that's producing carbon monoxide, so one of those appliances that we talked about, or an attached garage where you might park your car and your car might give off some fumes, we want to make sure that that's being checked on by something that's constantly sniffing the air. What I mean by that is that we want something that's either on the ceiling, the wall, or in a plug that's able to constantly sample the air. So we don't want anything pushed against it. We want it constantly being able to sample the air to let you know if this odorless, colorless, invisible gas is present.
Now, and thank you for that. So where are they supposed to be? They're supposed to be outside every living area.
Yes.
And
one on each level of your house. So if you have a basement, a first floor, second floor, you're going to need a minimum of 3.
All right. So not inside every sleeping quarter?
Not inside the sleeping rooms.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, so some of us may wonder, well, why? A couple things. Some homes are retrofitted with battery-only operated smoke detectors or carbon monoxide detectors. Some new construction have them hardwired.
Yes.
And they tend to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So we call that interconnected, and what that means is that there's literally a wire that connects. If you have one in your basement, one on your main floor, one on your second floor, they're all talking to each other. So if any of them usually we see these with smoke alarms, but now you can actually get combination units that do smoke and carbon monoxide.
Right.
And the good thing is that there is already a requirement for smoke alarms outside of sleeping areas, and with this addition, it can be a combination unit to achieve both of those things. And as soon as one device activates, it's going to let the other ones know, so that you're going to hear them all sound at the same time.
That's with the hardwired ones. Do you know if they have that capability with the battery ones? I'm just curious.
So there is an option to do that. It's called wireless interconnected, and you absolutely can do that to meet your carbon monoxide alarm requirements as long as they're in the right places.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're now talking about, as you mentioned, it's colorless, it's odorless, et cetera. And we've sort of identified which are the key, I don't want to say culprits, but devices that are most likely going to, if they fail, create this issue. What are some of the ways that we can figure it out, attend to it, test it? I mean, we've got the device itself, but is there any preventative maintenance that we could be doing?
So we definitely want to make sure that our carbon monoxide alarms are being changed out. They have a 10-year lifespan. So when I would recommend putting them on the same schedule as your smoke alarms. It's a good idea. That way, when you go to do a test, which we require, we say change the clock change the battery, right? So even the units that have the lithium-ion batteries, maybe they're good. We want to, every time you change the hour, we'll check the power.
Oh, okay. Change the hour, check the power.
Yeah. So that, and what that means is you want to push the button that's labeled test on these devices, whether it's your smoke alarm or your carbon monoxide alarm, and you want to make sure that they're going to sound. How do you know if you have a combination unit, if it's going to be a smoke alarm or a smoke and carbon monoxide alarm? That's a question we get asked quite frequently. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to listen to it. So after you push that button, you're going to hear a 3 beep cycle and then a 4 beep cycle. If you hear the 4 beep cycle, it means that you have carbon monoxide in that alarm as well. Also around the ring, usually where you test, where you push the test button, it's going to literally say smoke and carbon monoxide alarm.
Excellent. Okay, so I think this is critical. We have seen either death-related or serious injury related to carbon monoxide. I don't know, is that growing in frequency or is it relatively plateaued and we're just trying to do a better job of early identification? What's the goal here?
Yeah, the goal is because we have learned from incidents that have taken place, and we want to make sure we're increasing that detection just so that we are aware of where carbon monoxide is in our house. Should one fail for some reason, you have backups in place. We are usually talking about basement fuel-fired appliances. And that actually raises another good point, which is when we talk about basement fuel-fired appliances, they need to exhaust to the outside, right? So especially snowy weeks, we've had a lot of them recently, especially this winter. We're going to want to make sure that the exhaust that goes to the outside, it's that little pipe coming off of your house. And if you're not sure if you have a fuel-fired appliance, see if you have a gas line coming to your house, because that's another really good way to tell. But where you see the exhaust pipe coming out, it's usually right by your furnace room. We're going to want to make sure that's clear, because if it's blocked, some of that gas can actually come back into the home.
Excellent. Now, most furnaces would have a sensor that if they're not getting the right pressure to exhaust, they would turn themselves off, or is that a fallacy?
It's all based on what you have in your home and how old the equipment is and that kind of a piece. So
okay, so the goal is if you're shoveling your driveway and you happen to have a fire hydrant on your property, you want to shovel around that.
Yes.
And you might as well go around the other side of your house and look for the vent pipe that's coming out.
Yes.
Typically, has it got a bit of a hook on it?
It does have a little bit of a hook on it, because what we try to avoid is we try to avoid the fact where something could come up against it, so that little hook almost prevents that a little bit.
Excellent. The other thing that we talked about, and is there anything else that we should cover on this, or we think we've covered it relatively well?
I will say briefly for apartment buildings.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we also had changes to the carbon monoxide alarms in apartment buildings. And when I say fuel-fired appliance, I'm going to add something here. I'm going to call it forced air fuel-fired appliance. What that means is, let's say you have your furnace. It's going to force air from around the area that was burnt to create that heat, right? It's going to force that air through ductwork to get to where you're living. If you're in an apartment building and your unit or your corridor is served by this forced air from the area that could become contaminated, we also require carbon monoxide alarms there. So if it's your unit, we're going to require carbon monoxide alarms in your unit. If it's only the corridors in your high-rise, or multi-unit residential, then those corridors would have to have a carbon monoxide alarm.
All right, we've got a fair number of people who, I don't know what the exact mix is, and I'm going to full disclosure on that, whether it's home ownership or tenancy. And I want to get into that second thing a little bit later. So I told you we were going to talk about permitting as well. We'll bump that down a little bit. Let's keep going on this topic just for a minute, because a fair number of people are living in a tenanted accommodation. They've got a landlord, whether that's high-rise multi-unit, for example, or mid-rise multi-unit, or whether it's a secondary suite, a second unit in the house, et cetera. And if I'm a tenant, I may have limited access compared to if I was a homeowner itself. So what are some things that if I'm a tenant, I should be mindful of? I think many tenants like to have peaceful and quiet enjoyment in their home and not be disturbed by a landlord.
Yeah.
And sometimes you hear about that, friction between landlords and tenants. We want, stay out of my life as long as I pay my rent.
Yeah.
This isn't one of those cases, though. Like, let's talk about what we're talking about today in terms of fire prevention and maintenance of the home and maintenance of the equipment and the relationship I need to have with my landlord or property manager around that?
Yeah, so we do need to make sure we're testing these devices every month. And that also includes, as part of the new requirements, inside the fuel fire appliance room itself. So if you don't have access to that and you're a tenant, but you share a wall or a ceiling with that, then we're going to want to make sure we're allowing the owner or landlord access so that they can test that on your behalf. Inside your units, same thing. This is checking, it's a piece of life safety equipment at the end of the day, and it's absolutely required to have that. If you find that it's not working because you're the tenant and you've tested it yourself, notify your landlord. And that's what you can do to help us, help the community.
So you're not a lawyer and you're not the landlord-tenant board, but you do understand the legislation that was just introduced. How does that likely change the nature of the relationship between a tenant and a landlord in terms of, I would imagine, if I was the landlord for a moment and something went wrong, ultimately I would be held accountable or liable, and my defense would not be good enough to say, well, I left it up to the tenant to figure it out, to check their equipment, et cetera. So you're saying that this equipment needs to be checked. Is this a recommendation that the equipment needs to be checked once a month, or is it a requirement? And if it's a requirement, how does that change the dynamic of the relationship in terms of notice to enter the property, to do my job, to check it so that I make sure that I'm doing my job?
Yeah, so what we want to make sure we're doing is we want to make sure that we are allowing that access to happen. It might involve making notice under different legislation, but that's definitely something that we want to make sure is getting done. And then when you're done as the landlord, if you're done checking that thing, make a record of it. And that's really your best defense if something was to occur, is you know what, I did check it and it functioned when I tested it, and I can now walk away from that property knowing that my tenants are safe.
Excellent. When we come back from the break, I mentioned that there were two main things that we were talking about. One was obviously the changes to, and the highlight being the carbon monoxide detection. But the other thing that we're talking about is your role in permitting and inspection and sort of the nerves that can cause. And I wanted you to sort of put our minds at ease as to really justify, for lack of a better word, justify why it's important to do these things.
Yeah.
Fair enough?
Absolutely.
So you know, we're going to shuffle our topics a little bit, but I think it's important to understand, because there are changes to the building code, there are changes to the fire code, and obviously we're after prevention and life safety. So when we come back from the break, more from Chief Fire Prevention Officer with Barrie Fire and Emergency Services, Tim Donis. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and Chief of Fire Prevention Tim Donis and I are having a conversation around changes in legislation and the importance around education and prevention and life-saving, and some of the changes that came out effective January 1st, 2026 regarding prevention. And but one of the key things that we touched on, or that I want to explore, is the whole idea around inspection and permitting, and some of these things that often get construed, and I don't want to say misconstrued, honestly construed as sort of a hindrance to progress, layered in bureaucracy. And Chief, let's get into that, because I mean, I know that you mentioned that the fire service is involved at the very beginning of certain applications, whether it's for a new development, a condo development, a new subdivision development. These applications are crossing your desk, and a representative of the fire service will often speak to either approval or flagging some cautionary items, or flat out just denying the application based on code violation or the inability for your service to support the application.
Yes.
So let's get into why we need to reconsider our level of maybe even sometimes disdain around the permitting process.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we notice, and one of our main goals with the permitting process, is to make sure that all of the things that are in the building code, fire code, whatever the applicable piece of legislation is, we want to make sure that those things are being followed. These are the minimum requirements in the province. So we don't ask for things above and beyond. We ask for, basically, we want to make sure that who we care about most of all is the people who are going to be inside that building once it becomes occupied.
And that could be different than the person that owns or the investor that owns the property itself. I think that's what you're referring to.
It absolutely could be.
Okay.
So yes, if you have a developer and then they end up selling it to somebody, and then there's a property management company. So there's lots of different competing interests in terms of where their piece is going to stop and somebody else is going to start. That's where the permitting process comes in, is we want to make sure that that whole transition piece is looked after with consistency.
Okay, so with that in mind, by the way, permitting extends beyond residential occupancy. It can extend to commercial, industrial, but it also can extend to even events planning and sort of short-term event permits.
Yeah.
Again, I think that common thread goes throughout, which includes ensuring that you're taking care of the people who are going to be occupying the property. But what are some of the things that have, I guess, maybe a story or an analogy or an example of where the permitting process either caught something before it happened or where you learned from? You said oftentimes we do things based on what we learned from before that we could do differently.
Yes. So we find this especially in houses that have been converted to a different use than they used to be. So for instance, the house was created, it used to have one family living in it, and now it has two or multiple families living in it. And unfortunately, when we go in to do the fire investigation portion of it, where there's been a fire, we want to find out what happened and what the circumstances were. We do a code assessment as well to make sure everything that should have been here, was it here? And especially when it comes to fire separations and items like that, these items would be caught at a permit stage sometimes. And there are examples where that isn't necessarily the case, but definitely when we can do something about it, we want to make sure it's being picked up so that you might have a fire in a basement unit, but it's the people upstairs that are going to be affected if there's no separation between the basement and upstairs because fire goes up, right? So these are the things we want to make sure every occupant in the building has an equal ability to get out, to be alerted to a fire, and to have the things in place that are going to keep them safe.
All right, so I'm going to want to dig a little bit deeper into this because anybody who's paying attention to the news, paying attention to social media, having conversations with friends, family, somebody knows somebody who undoubtedly is having a conversation around, and you talked about competing interests, but this is a slightly different competing interest, and that's the affordability crisis that we are in. Finding homes that are affordable for home buyers, definitely an issue. Finding rental accommodations for those who aren't in a position to either buy a home or where home ownership isn't just in their best interest. Maybe it's a different point in their life or something like that. But affordable and attainable, these are words that have come up, affordable and attainable, separate and apart from each other, housing accommodations. And then just, throw into that fuel prices and grocery prices and just cost of living in general. People find themselves, you can read about this on the news, on social, like I said, people are having to get creative for the most basic thing, which is shelter and accommodation. And therefore, they're making a decision about how much they can afford to meet their needs. Can I afford something that's in the $2,000 and $3,000 range versus in the $1,000 and $2,000 range or below that even? And what am I compromising? What is my acceptable compromise in order to get warmth and shelter? With that in mind, what are you finding with those who, I'm going to say, are having to make these difficult choices of, I need to eat and survive, for example, and what compromises are they making, and what are you seeing in terms of calls that you're responding to that likely relate back to that very tough decision that people are making? It's definitely something that the province is looking at, I know for sure.
one thing that we've noticed starting January 1st was that there was actually a change in the Ontario Fire Code. When we talk about retrofitting existing buildings, what that means is making sure every building is up to a minimum level of life safety based on how it's being used. Part of that is there's a new allowance so that you can have up to 4 people sharing a unit. And what I mean by a unit is cooking, sleeping, eating, and conducting their sanitary functions. And you can have 2 separate pockets of that in a house now. And so, tenants might be unrelated on the top half and on the bottom half as well, in the basement, say, if it's a basement unit. And we're going to treat that like it's a 2-unit occupancy. So what that means is that there's some concessions in terms of separations between the bedrooms and the hallways in each of those units, but we're still going to ask for the separation between the 2 units because we have to make sure that the unrelated parts of the building still speak to each other so everybody has that consistent, safe approach.
So clarify for me, does that differ from where you would have to have 2 separate like actual entrances to the entrances or exits to the exterior of the building? Are actual separate apartment units?
Yeah. So, for instance, if you have 4 people living in separate rooms, but then they share a kitchen, they share a bathroom, and that kind of thing. If they have a door opening directly onto the outside, they now have adequate exiting. Which is a big one that we find when you consider rooming accommodations, because there's another part that speaks to a lot of complex requirements, which I don't really want to get into right now, but one of those is having two ways out from the basement. So this does alleviate a little bit of that risk.
Okay, all right, so there is now where can people get this information if they want to explore, how do I know if I'm meeting these criteria?
Yeah, so there's 2 ways. So the official answer is in the fire code, which you can find online on the eLaws website. The other way is if you have a concern for your safety and you live in a building, you can always reach out to fire.prevention@barrie.ca, and you can just give a summary of what your concern is. We can send a fire prevention officer or an inspector out to come and take a look to make sure all the things that are supposed to be in place are in place. And we'll do that assessment. There's no charge to it. We can keep it anonymous. It's something that you can just notify us of, and we're happy to come out to do that assessment for you.
Just curious, are you rolling up in a fire truck when that happens, or sometimes in terms of keeping it anonymous,
Sure.
and a big red truck shows up, that's not exactly anonymous. So
no, yeah. So we do have vehicles. They're small vehicles. We have a few Mitsubishis. We have a Chevy Cruze. They're not as big and discreet, but they are red. And they are labeled with the fire department thing. But if you have a concern, we don't mind parking down the road and walking up.
Excellent. That's good information to know. Now, right along that, I think it's a perfect transition. You do have some proactive programs that you're running in terms of fire safety and during Fire Prevention Week, et cetera. But one of those programs is Alarm Save Live? No, what was it?
Alarm for Life.
Alarm for Life. Thank you. Go ahead and tell me about that program.
Yeah. So we're getting our operations crews involved with the public, and what the idea is that. It's not necessarily something that we're coming to check to make sure you have everything you need in place. We want to help facilitate you to realize that you have everything in place that you should have. So it's educational based. So when our crews come to the door, it's about recognizing the uniform, understanding that people from different backgrounds might actually respond differently to the uniform. So we want to make sure that you're familiar and that it's in the public in a way that it's just a conversation at the door. You get to know our crews, you get to know our firefighters, and we're going to ask a list of questions to say, do you have the right carbon monoxide alarms in your home? Do you have the right smoke alarms in your home? And we take that and we don't do a follow-up with it. It's strictly for your education to say, oh, well, do I need it? You have that one-on-one access. To that, we hit over 10,000 houses a year through this program, and it's a good idea. Over a 5-year cycle, we try to get out to all the homes.
So I want to just pick up on something, and I think we live in the era. I dread referencing it, but post-COVID era where a lot of people found themselves not wanting to engage as much as they used to, and we tend to keep a barrier between ourselves and the public or a stranger, for example, by way of the doorbell camera or just not answering the door, etc. This is not meant to be disciplinary or punitive in any way, shape, or form. There is a general amnesty. People are allowed to welcome you into the home and not have to worry that if you found it in what would have otherwise been an infraction, it's now a recommendation to get your place up to code.
Yeah, what we're talking about is we're talking about 50 to 60% of homes that do have working smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, but there's a large portion that don't right now. And what that means is smoke alarms that are within their 10-year time frame and have been tested recently and function. So that's our main goal, is to find out, do you have everything? Are you aware of what you have to have? And it's a conversation. That's all it is. We walk away after that conversation, and we're happy to just get that message out to you.
I want our audience to hear one more time what you said, and I'm just going to dissect it a little bit. You hit on average 10,000 homes a year during this campaign, and 50 to 60%, otherwise known as 5,000 or 6,000, comply or don't comply. So it's almost half-half, but
it's
just,
almost half and half.
Yeah,
but 50 to 60,000, or sorry, 5 to 6,000 would be in compliance.
Would be in compliance, but that's almost half aren't in compliance.
Yes.
Like, that's a staggering number.
It's a real concern for us, and it's something that we definitely want to get that message out, that it's so important to test your smoke alarms. It's so important to test your carbon monoxide alarms. And now with these recent changes, it's even more important to make sure that it's a good chance to go back and say, do I have all the things in my house that I'm supposed to have? It's a good time with this change to go and do that now, so that we can start the next 10 years fresh.
We got to go to break, but I don't want to leave this just yet, okay? So, seconds count, and tell me the stat about every minute that a fire is left to burn.
Sure. So approximately every minute, a fire will double in size. So if you talk about smoke alarms, it's going to take them a certain amount of time to activate already. So the fire's already started. What we want to make sure is that you're getting as much of a heads up as possible to get out. So we're not allowing that fire to double, triple, quadruple in size before you're even aware that it's happening.
Okay, when we come back from the break, Chief, let's talk about some misconceptions, and let's talk about some best practices. I hate the term, to be honest with you, but a checklist.
Sure.
Okay, so when we come back, we're going to have more from Chief Tim Donis, Chief Fire Prevention Officer, Barrie Fire and Emergency Services, and we're going to talk about what you should be doing and also dispel some misconceptions. Stay with us. And welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and we're talking about fire prevention. We're talking about fire education, and I've got Chief Fire Prevention Officer Tim Donis here from Barrie Fire and Emergency Services, and we've covered a lot of ground. We've covered, some changes to legislation that are relevant. We've talked about new construction and permitting and why inspections matter, not that they're just a cash grab, which I understand and I appreciate people feel that way, I really do, but it is about saving lives and preventing injury and death. We've talked about gatherings. We've talked about tenancy versus home ownership. We've talked about some of the key culprits. But let's get into a little bit more of I'm going to call it a rapid fire section.
Sure.
And maybe I shouldn't have said that, but anyway, apologies for that pun. That was not intended. But I actually wrote down a couple of things, and I'm just going to pull out my phone and reference them, because this is the modern era of a notepad.
Yes.
But let's address some misconceptions here. And you touched on this actually as we were having our pre-conversation around, you noticed some things around people delaying calling 911 because they're sort of trying to figure things out first. Yeah. And in our last segment, we talked about the fact that the capacity or the impact of a fire doubles every minute.
Yeah.
So talk to me about some of the misconceptions that people may have around sorting things out internally on their own before they dial 911?
Yeah, what we find is that often when we talk to people, because we do question everybody after a fire, common threads that we find are people like to go and investigate the fire. So what I mean by that is, I hear this alarm going off, but what's actually going? Is this something that's serious, or is it a false alarm? Right? And I don't like the term false alarm, but it's something that people respond to. So oftentimes they'll go to another area of the house. There's time to travel to that house. Let's say it's happening in the middle of the night. You might be waking up, walking downstairs, seeing that there is a fire. We find that people, after that, they've now identified there is a fire. They then go and gather with their family before they actually start to evacuate the house. So all these things take some delay times. And let's keep in mind that the average smoke alarm detection time is about 40 seconds. So they're very important, and this is why we need them so frequently throughout the house, is because if they're not throughout the house that frequently, it's going to add to more delay time. What the goal is here is, because we know how people usually behave in those occurrences, what we want to make sure is that when they go to take those delay times, there's enough time for them to get, let's say, down their stairwell to the front door and out the door before there's too much smoke generated from the fire.
Now, there is a difference between rescue and firefighting.
Yes.
But your average response time when I dial 911 is going to be plus or minus 6 minutes, is it?
That's our goal, is to be there within 6 minutes. Our first priority is always occupant safety before we talk about property loss.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but I'm just saying 40 seconds for a smoke detector or a carbon monoxide detector to even detect.
Yes.
Then a minute or two for people to figure out what's going on, maybe even 3.
Yeah.
And then by the time you call it 6 minutes, you're now at possibly 10 minutes.
Yeah. So yeah, when you get into that graph, it's doubled in size every minute for 10 minutes. That's what our crew is usually showing up to.
Okay. Common misconception: I will smell the smoke before the fire is detected.
Not necessarily. The truth is, if you're asleep and you don't physically see the smoke may contain, we talked about carbon monoxide, it may contain carbon monoxide, it may contain a plethora of other really bad things to breathe in. And if you smell that smoke, you might not be able to react anymore, because it might react with your body in a bad way.
Okay. I work night shift or I work day shift, and I don't like noise. I shut my door. Versus, I like air circulation. I don't want to sleep in a stuffy bedroom. I want my door open.
Yeah, we always recommend sleeping with your door closed. Even those hollow core wood doors, you bang on them, they seem very light. Even those doors can provide about 5 minutes of protection. So we have, in lots of cases, observed where a fire starts in a bedroom, the door's closed, there's less damage to the corridor now because that person closed their door, which is actually what we actually recommend when you're leaving your room. Is to close your door behind you as well, for this reason. You're going to keep the fire where it is. And then, if you go past another bedroom before you get out down the stairs, if that door is also closed, it adds another barrier. So there's times where a corridor might be full of smoke, full of actual fire damage, but the bedroom beyond that door, it's almost like it's untouched. You might see a little bit of smoke, but you can still tell the sheets are white. The paint's still the original color, and when you see that, it is astonishing, and it's a real credit to the fact that any closed door can provide that barrier.
Mm-hmm. So is one more dangerous than the other, the fire itself, or all of the other elements of the fire, for example, the smoke?
Yeah. So outside of the room where the fire starts, the smoke is definitely more hazardous. When we talk about, we used the term egress before, for instance. That term egress, what I mean by that is how you're getting from where you are when you discover the fire out of the building. And that, the number one threat to egress is usually the smoke.
Okay. So can't see, basically, for example.
Yeah.
But there's also the inhalants, right? You're inhaling the toxins, and homes today are built differently than they were 50 years ago, 100 years ago. There's a lot more manufactured plastic-based or ethylene or gasoline-based product.
Yes. So right down to the furniture. The couch you sit on, 100 years ago, it might have been made with potentially even horsehair. right?
Right.
If you burn horsehair, it's mostly organic, whereas now we have these new carbon, other types of polyurethane foam and things of that nature, which react very differently. They burn hotter, they burn faster, and they produce a lot more black, thick, toxic smoke that makes it very difficult for you to see and can actually affect the way that your brain interacts with your environment after you breathe it in.
All right. There are a lot of products out there on the market. I told you we're going to do sort of a rapid session.
Yeah.
I've got a cooktop fire.
Yes.
Kitchens are still the primary, the number one cause of fire?
They're the number one cause, especially where there's injuries, yeah.
Okay, so especially where there's injuries. So what am I doing to put out a fire if I don't happen to have a fire extinguisher handy?
Yeah.
I've got some options, and there are some products out there that retailers are trying to sell you.
Yeah.
I'll just toss that on top of it or whatever. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the goal is, if there's a lid to that, let's say we're talking about cooking fires. If you have a pot on fire and you take your lid and you put the lid on top, that's a nice tight fit. That's what it's designed for. If you can safely do that, that's great. There are these new fire blankets, and we don't actually recommend using them. And the reason that we're not recommending using them is because what we're finding is people are reaching over top of the fire, and it exposes their arms to potential burns. It could shift. It's a fabric, right? So when you put this fabric over top of the metal container, it can actually cause the opposite effect, which is, yes, it's going to exclude oxygen for a time, but if it slips off, now you're adding oxygen again. You get rid of oxygen or you add oxygen, and that can be detrimental to whether the fire continues or fades out.
Excellent. Okay, so we're addressing some of those. It's not that it's not a great idea. It's not approved, and there's some reasons why there are some side effects that could happen to it, et cetera.
Yeah.
Ultimately, though, if you can put the lid on it, great. And then what? Get out, or?
Yeah, the best thing you can do is if you can reach the dial to turn the power off, we want to eliminate the heat as well. So if you can turn the dial or shut the stove off, that's another good thing to do. If it involves reaching over something that's hazardous in order to do that, it's okay to just get out, and as long as everybody else is also out of the house.
All right. Now, here's one more thing that actually we live in a country where we've got people from different cultures, different backgrounds, different belief systems, et cetera, and we maybe all coming with different ideas of politics or engagement with people in uniform, or this is how we did it back home,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And I grew up in that family myself to a certain degree. You have a program that goes into the schools. Touch on it just for a moment, and what's the goal of the program there?
Yeah, so we do have a public education section, and they go into schools, and the reason for that is to help the kids, educate the kids. Hopefully those kids will take the messages home from their parents. We usually address smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, and the big one here, which is an interactive thing that you can do with as a family, is your home escape plan. So what that means is we actually encourage kids to go home with a notebook, with some graph paper, draw out your whole living room, and draw out your whole house, as a matter of fact, and find 2 ways out of every room if you can. And that's a really good interactive thing that you can do with your kids after they bring these lessons home, just so that we make sure that everybody has everything they need. We can cut down on that timeline for evacuation when there is a fire, and everybody can hopefully get out safe.
Excellent. I want to just take the last couple of seconds. You do have an association, Barrie Professional Firefighters Association, and you also run some campaigns out there. One of them is the boot drive and muscular dystrophy.
Yes.
You are a member of the association, if I understand correctly. Throw a little plug out there for some of the community progress. You got about 30 seconds left.
Okay, all right. So we definitely do get involved with the community fundraising. We try to help the community raise awareness to a lot of different things. We are having a charity hockey game coming up, and the goal is the firefighters are going to play the police officers. Little fun things like that can raise some money for a good cause is definitely something that our association looks at on a regular basis.
Excellent. Continue to wave and say hi to the firefighters. Maybe they'll honk the horn, maybe they won't. They love ice cream, by the way. I'll tell you that. Firefighters love ice cream. But Chief Tim Donis, thank you so much for spending time with me today. putting some education out there, some information, some awareness out there. You're running some great campaigns. Obviously, the goal is safety and fire prevention. Get ahead of it. As you said, the best fire is the one that didn't happen, right?
Yeah.
I probably said that wrong, but I want to thank you so much for taking time from your busy day and joining me here, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Great. Thank you very much for this opportunity. It's been fantastic.
Absolutely. And to you at home, we'll see you again next time. Thanks for tuning in. Take care.